side of S5, as passed by Senate version and as passed by House version. We're joined by council to continue that walkthrough. Good morning, Ms. Tchaikovsky.
Good morning. Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So we are going through the side-by-side comparison of S5. Where we left off yesterday was on page 12. So in the bill, we are in section 8125, which is the section regarding default delivery agent. So in the middle of page 12 in the budget section. And so here is again where some changes have been made by the House. And really what it does is it builds out the potential study and some of the initial stages of the default delivery agent. So budget. The committee shall open a proceeding on or before July 1, 2023, and at least every 3 years thereafter to establish the default delivery agent credit costs or costs and the quantity of credits to be generated for the subsequent 3-year period. That proceeding shall include a potential study conducted by the Department of Public Service, the first of which shall be completed not later than September 1, 2024, to include an assessment and quantification of technically available, maximum achievable, and program achievable thermal resources. The results shall include a comparison to the legal obligations of the thermal sector portion of the GWSA. The potential study shall consider and evaluate market conditions for delivery of clean heat measures within the state, including an assessment of workforce characteristics capable of meeting consumer demands and meeting the obligations of Section 578. So this is adding detail of what the potential study needs to review specifically, and specifically what are some of the maximum available options.
I also noticed that it says the first of which. So I'm guessing, do we have a change to your mom that indicates that the potential study may be a.
So it's on this. It's on this page. It's actually right above that. So it says at least every three years thereafter.
Right. Thank you.
All right.
So in E1.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
So and I think you heard testimony in the Senate from the department, but in the House they spent much more time. They spent a lot more time in this section, and they heard from Efficiency Vermont. And they regularly go through this process with the department. And so they are on every 3-year schedule to do a potential study. So yes,
Sure.
It's a regularly updated
Great.
system.
Thanks. Yeah, you're refreshing my neurons here. That it was tied in, just like they do the demand reduction plan.
Yes.
They do a potential study as part of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So McCormick.
Okay, I understand what's here. How does it differ from the Senate?
It had significantly more detail.
Okay,
It's
more
filling in
detail. It doesn't
No.
not have something we have or
No.
have something different. Okay,
I would say A+ House members.
watch it.
So in B, the proceeding shall also include the development of a 3-year plan and associated proposed budget for the default delivery agent to be informed by the final results of the department's potential study. The default delivery agent may propose a portion of its budget towards promotion and market uplift, workforce development, and training for clean heat measures. So there were some things that, some sort of externalities, I think you might say, that there was a lot of discussion about how workforce and training could be incorporated. And so it isn't directly necessarily incorporated anywhere else, but it's going to be part of the budget development for the DA. And there will also be opportunities for public participation.
Market uplift refers to what?
You know, the market.
That a market is created and grows, and
I don't know what that word means, really.
I happened to ask the same question of Ben Julie Walsh. Happy to share his answer.
guessing it something like how commerce seeing this
You know what?
important activity.
I don't think I actually don't have it in writing. Never mind.
Okay, so we'll double back to that one.
What exactly is the phrase?
Market
uplift.
uplift.
Just
So-
maybe more, that there's more of a market.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of conversations about needing to increase the workforce, needing to increase the supply of these appliances and materials. And so I think it's related to that.
Okay, right. I mean, I know that we talked about workforce limitations and supply chain issues. Great, thank you.
So on page 13, there is a small change in subsection G. And so in subsection G now reads, the default delivery agent shall create specific programs for multi-unit dwellings, condominiums, rental properties, commercial and industrial buildings, and manufactured homes.
I'm glad we got rid of the word condo.
That's fair.
Thank you.
So next is section 8126, and here is where a few changes have occurred that we will maybe need to talk about a little bit. So the first of which, so rulemaking, subsection B, the requirements to adopt rules and any requirements regarding the need for legislative approval before any part of the Clean Heat Standard goes into effect do not in any way impair the commission's authority to issue orders or take any other actions before or after the rules take effect. So you will recall when the Senate passed S5, the checkback language was added, and the checkback language at the end in 8131 that we'll get to in a minute said the commission shall not issue rules or orders without legislative authority. The House has changed that to just say rules, and it will allow the commission to issue orders.
Okay.
There is an additional provision making it a little more specific, but here it is saying, yes, the commission can issue orders before the rules take effect, but the primary component of the program needs to be in the rules so that the substantive part of the program will be before the legislature in 2025.
Sarah Hudson?
Thank you. So I just wanted, I feel like I know the answers, but I want to just say this out loud. So can the program move forward without going through the rulemaking process?
So this is a very large program. It will have multiple components. This version of the bill as passed by the House allows the PUC to issue orders. Some of the provisions they're allowed to issue orders on include appointing the default delivery agent and establishing the credit market. Those are part of the Clean Heat Standard program, but the details of how the Clean Heat Standard will be applied to the obligated parties needs to be in the rulemaking.
Yeah.
So the fuel dealers will not be obligated to purchase credits unless unless it goes through rulemaking.
Yes.
And so effectively, no one's prices will be affected unless it goes through rulemaking.
This bill does not do anything to impact the prices.
Okay.
This bill does not require a fee or tax. So that is not in this bill at all.
Okay.
The credit price is not being established in this bill. And the requirement to purchase credits is not being established. The program goal of having credits be purchased is being established in this goal, but the mechanism for doing so isn't in this bill and would need to be in the rules.
Okay. And I don't think we've gotten there yet.
Yeah,
but
there's more.
but
Yeah.
there's, I might have more follow-up about the rules. I just want to be really clear.
Yeah.
Okay.
What a good question. I hope folks are listening.
Along those same lines, is the PUC constrained to order, only writing orders for the things that are enumerated in the bill currently? They decide, oh, we want to write orders on something else we think is necessary in order to flesh out the details of the program. I'm just trying to see where the lines are between maintaining legislative control and fully equipping them to do the job well.
So to take a step back, the PUC has order authority already in Title 30 and uses it for a number of its other programs. In this bill, I did make a list, but there isn't one list in this bill of things that the PUC could issue orders for. I listed a few of the places a minute ago where order use has been mentioned. However, if you look on page 13 in subsection A, broadly speaking, the authority is that the commission shall adopt rules and may issue orders to implement and enforce the clean heat standard. So you are delegating fairly broad authority to the Public Utility Commission to issue orders they think are needed to implement and enforce aspects of the clean heat standard. But there is a provision later that we are going to talk about that does constrain that. The annual requirements for the credit amounts cannot be set in order.
Okay. And it says issue orders or take any other actions. What's any other actions encompass?
So,
contemplate?
well, so specifically, one of the only other specific actions in this bill currently is the requirement that fuel sellers register with the Public Utility Commission. And that is a date firm of January 31st, 2024, after which, even before the program goes into effect, they need to register with the PUC. If a fuel dealer doesn't, there will be potential to enforce against them. The PUC does have enforcement authority there. So that would be an action to enforce the clean heat standard.
Okay, and then, sorry, Senator McCormick, there's this phrase, and after final rules take effect. So that condition of getting to final rules taking effect, that is completely under the control of the legislature by virtue of the notwithstanding language we'll get to later.
Yes.
So there is a complete hard stop for implementation of the rule.
Yes. So I did want to say that there are multiple places where this phrase adopt rules or issue orders is in this bill. However, at the end, there is an overriding provision that notwithstands all of those prior provisions, which prevents rules from taking effect without legislative authorization enacted in a bill.
Okay,
Oh.
thank you.
How common is it for an administrator or a quasi-judicial body to issue orders based on the statute, as opposed to, my understanding has always been that the people who implement the law develop rules that are driven by the law and are confined by the law, and that then they operate under the rules rather than looking to the statute directly. The statute drives, as I say, drives and limits the rules. The administrators operate within the rules, and that the orders derive from the rules. That the rules drive the orders and the rules confine the orders, just as statute drives and confines rules. Am I wrong about that?
So I would just say that the Public Utility Commission is a unique body, and they are unique in that they have this additional authority called order authority that other agencies do not have. So the word order is used specifically in two different ways. When they issue a decision as a quasi-judicial body, they order something based on that reflects their decision. However, they also have procedural orders, which function similarly to rules. They have been delegated that authority in Title 30 to use it for specific instances, and it is like rulemaking, but has a slightly different process. So it is a sort of hybrid system that is unlike what other agencies do.
And now, in terms of rules, the legislative oversight is LCAR, what legislative oversight is there of orders?
There isn't a similar process. It is a different process. It is a much more abbreviated process.
So are we basically handing it off to the PSB and hoping for the best?
What?
Trusting them?
In this bill, you have delegated in multiple places the authority to implement and enforce the Clean Heat Standard program, which is a process that the legislature does regularly. You delegate your authority. This is using orders versus rules is a slightly different process than you may be familiar with. So I will stop there. Rules do have a defined process in statute. Orders are actions by a government agency that are appealable and challengeable. Those appeals go to the Supreme Court.
The appeals orders are appeals. Okay.
Two.
Okay, any other questions on, well, there's more to go in this section. So I'm glad we're going down. This is a critical piece of the bill and had a lot of discussion outside of committee and a certain amount of confusion about how it operates outside committee. Senator White.
Thank you, Chairman Frey. So I know that this will come up later as well, but I did just want to be really direct because there was a quote in VT Digger last night from Governor Scott, and I feel like it would be helpful, at least for me, to understand kind of what the answer is to this question that he's posing, or kind of the framing of what he's saying, so that I know how to respond to constituents who are reading it. So he basically says that he would like lawmakers to clarify what has been referred to as the check back provision. So this is not what we're considering the check back provision.
No.
But this is also additional, I would say, coverage in some way to the conversation around waiting until we have enough information to move forward with a program. And so he says that they want the final go-ahead to implement the clean heat program that would be developed by the PUC. We have that in later sections. We also have this entire process to possibly look at implementation. So he has said that he would like to see it go through the normal legislative process. And my understanding is rulemaking is a normal legislative process. Would that be an accurate reflection of what rulemaking is? Because I think to Senator McCormick's question, it's kind of like a parallel process in some regard for more administrative, not even legislation, but more administrative implementation than what we're like. You're on LCAR, like I just don't think people understand the rulemaking process.
No, they don't.
Yeah. Would you consider this a typical legislative process for a complex program?
So I don't think that this section necessarily is related to what you're asking.
Okay.
So because this section is not maybe a typical process.
Okay.
So because what this is setting up is the use of both orders and rules in the development of this process, which, as I just mentioned, is unique to the PUC.
Yes.
And so, and it is defining here in the statute the process that the PUC is going to need to use with those orders.
Yes.
So I am hesitant at the moment to say what a normal legislative process is, specifically because I'm not entirely sure what the governor is referring to.
Yeah.
We can talk more about that at the end, I think, but this is setting up a specific procedure for use that reflects the PUC's unique processes that they already use.
Okay, and I think what I am hearing from folks is a confusion that this is the implementation process, and that is incorrect. So if folks are reading this section and thinking, oh, this is us saying that it's just going to happen with no legislative follow-up, that is not accurate. That might, because I'm feeling like the confusion is literally not understanding the bill.
Sure. So there are multiple sections related to implementation, and this is one of them. But this is more about this is less about the first set of rules and the initial implementation. This is more about long-term.
Okay. Great. So thank you. That's helpful.
And I think, so I want to walk a careful line and not asking council to respond to any
Oh, like no legal.
remarks of the administration. We don't want to ask her to be sort of in the middle of a debate or something like that, but I appreciate the
Yeah, I
question.
get-
We're just trying to be very clear, accurate, precise here. And it's helpful to parse it so finely.
Well, I think my issue is I genuinely think that folks have read this section and think that that's the implementation section. And that's and I think if you weren't familiar with reading this, you might say, oh, it looks like you're just doing it through rulemaking, what is rulemaking? So I'm trying to be my best intent on what the confusion is. So I will not ask you any more specific questions, but I do think that I'm trying to have best intent with what the confusion is, and that would be a reasonable point of confusion.
Sure. I mean, sometimes I think, I don't know, Senator McDonald here, he could fill us in the details.
I think this is-
D-Day took a lot of planning, and then they crossed the channel. And that's when things started.
That's a
But
good analogy.
They needed to get ready.
McDonald, what a good point.
For a long period of time, there was like, how would you do it? What equipment would you need? And when would you go? And all the rest. And here we are, I think, to me, the bill is
What-
getting ready. And then it's saying, okay, well, the decision to go and to commence that whole invasion of Europe was a completely separate thing. And that's what implementation is, I think, the way we've been talking about it.
Getting off
That's
this,
a good analogy.
staying off the text for just a minute. So no, the discussion of rules, people get confused because
Yes.
rules have the force of law.
They do.
They know that, but the reason rules have the force of law is that they're driven by the law and they're confined by the law. Their purpose is to make the law happen, okay? And we're,
Exactly.
okay, and that's what people don't get, so,
Exactly. Thank you. That's a good quote.
thank you.
So we should giddy up a little bit.
Sorry.
Because it's mindful of this time. We want to focus on that now. Want to see how close to our finishing our walkthrough we can get.
So in addition, on this page 13, so I mentioned yesterday that language assistance was requested by the Office of Racial Equity. It's been added here as part of the order process. And so in addition to providing notice, an opportunity for comment, when the PUC issues orders, they will need to provide notice of language assistance and arrange for that language assistance for the orders to be translated. So the next change is actually on page 15, and it is in the list of eligible clean heat measures. So there's a couple of changes here. So the first, I think the first, it was already implied, but is now made explicit. So subsection D, list of eligible measures, eligible clean heat measures delivered to or installed in residential, commercial, and industrial buildings in Vermont shall include. So there was discussion in the House about whether or not they applied to all those buildings. And so, yes, I think that was implicit in your
Yeah.
draft, but
Right.
Yeah.
Better to be
But-
explicit than have people wonder.
So then there is a change in number 11. So number 11, the replacement of a manufactured home with a high efficiency manufactured home and weatherization or other efficiency or electrification measures in manufactured homes. And then there's a new number 12. So it is line extensions that connect facilities with thermal loads to the grid.
By line extensions, we mean like electric power lines. Okay,
Yeah.
just making it clear, thanks.
Yeah.
And is this designed to address the fact that if you have 100 amp service to your home and now you want to electrify cooking and eating and maybe charging your car, you're going to need to extend? I mean, is this line replacement or line? I'm just trying to figure out what situation came up.
No.
We've talked about the upgrading your service to your house, but this sounds like something
No.
different.
So specifically, they were discussing businesses that are currently using other fuels. And so it would be, well, it says line extension. And so I think it's for, specifically, they talked a lot about maple sugaring and electrifying those operations. So electrifying operations that are currently using fossil fuels that may not be connected.
Okay,
Grid.
that sounds like Vermont Electric Co-op. Okay, thank you.
All right, the next change is on page 17. So on page 17, and this is in the regards to the emissions schedule. There's small change at the top of page 17. So I'll read the whole sentence. In determining the baseline emission rates for clean heat measures that are fuels, emission baseline shall fully account for methane emission reductions or captures already occurring or expecting to occur for each fuel pathway as a result of local, state, or federal legal requirements that have been enacted or adopted that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So previously it was the word policies. And so it's making it legal requirements or things that are binding.
So just more explicit.
Yeah,
Yeah. And basically, you don't get credit for following the law.
yeah. And I think there was discussion about things that maybe are permissive versus things that are required by other people. And then still on page 17, there's a change. There are some changes in subsection H, review of consequences. So the commission shall biennially assess harmful consequences that may arise in Vermont or elsewhere from the implementation of specific types of clean heat measures and shall set standards or limits to prevent those consequences. Such consequences shall include environmental burdens as defined in 3 VSA 6002, and that is the environmental justice section. It also includes public health, deforestation or forest degradation, conversion of grasslands, increased emissions of criteria pollutants, damage to watersheds, and the creation of new methane. Criteria pollutants are a specific set of air pollutants that the EPA regulates. There are 6 of them. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but I can get you the list.
SOx, NOx.
Yeah, that's as far as I can get, but yeah. Particulate matter, and that's
Nitrogen oxide, SOx, NOx. That's anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll get that on the list. Thank you. Can you send us that list, please? Thank you.
all right. The next change is on page 19 in the Clean Heat Standard Technical Advisory Group. So first, they just added the word human health impacts as something that the TAG will review. And then they did add a new item to the list of things for the TAG to review. They added calculating the savings associated with public health benefits due to clean heat measures. So I think you can sort of see that one of the House's primary concerns was impact on human health, be that positive or negative.
I know that we've had Department of Health in here, and I think the short takeaway is that for 5 years, you've saved as much in health costs as you have in energy costs when you do a full low energy, whether they.
On page 20, still in the tag, there's a couple of changes that have been added to the tag. So subsection B on page 20, the Clean Heat Standard Technical Advisory Group shall consist of up to 15 members appointed by the commission. The commission shall establish the procedures for the tag, including the member term lengths and meeting procedures. So I will stop and just say that the Appropriations Committee added that because the Equity Advisory Group had a cap on the number of members and the tag didn't. and they were trying to get a firm sense of the per diem amounts that would need to be appropriated. So they set a number of 15. In addition, they added as a member the Department of Public Health, and then they also added to the list of expertise that members can have, mitigating, so expertise in mitigating environmental burdens as defined in the environmental justice chapter, mitigating public health impacts of air quality and climate change, and then deforestation and forest degradation. On page 21, there are a couple of changes to the equity advisory group. So the first one is that they added reference to manufactured homes. So at the bottom of page 21, in number 6, the equity advisory group shall be providing information to the commission on the challenges renters and residents of manufactured homes face in equitably accessing clean heat measures. So adding, and then on to the next page, and recommendations to ensure that renters and residents of manufactured homes have equitable access to clean heat measures.
Do you happen to recall a discussion from that house? How many Vermonters live in manufactured homes? Figure. I have a feeling it's something like 70,000.
Oh, I don't know. I heard a couple of percentages from individual communities. Like I think there was something that Brattleboro's 10%. Actually, I should stop. I don't remember.
Yeah, I'll check in with Laura Holland and see if she has a figure. Okay, thank you.
So then on page 22, added to the equity advisory group. Previously in your version, it was community action agencies could be part of the equity advisory group. And this is specifying that a community action agency with expertise in low income weatherization and a community action agency with expertise in serving residents of manufactured homes. I think potentially that could be the same community action agency. And then also the Vermont Association of Area Agencies on Aging has been added as well. And then on page 22, so subsection C has been added to add a sunset to the group. So the equity advisory group shall cease to exist when the initial clean heat standard rules are adopted. Thereafter, the issues described in subsection A shall be reviewed by the commission in compliance with 3 VSA chapter 72. So
Chapter 72, something broader than EJ.
no, I actually think it's EJ. Yes, I think it is to review in light of the, and I should probably double check that. But in light of the environmental justice criteria, and hopefully by then the environmental justice rules will have been either adopted or starting to be adopted.
So, yeah, let's chase that one down just so that we know why in one place we're referring to 3 VSA section 6002 and then chapter 7.
Well, section 6002 is the definition section of the environmental justice chapter.
Okay. And the environmental justice chapter is chapter 72.
I think so, but I would need to double check.
It's okay.
So, so then section 8131 is the next change. So as I already alluded to, your version said PUC shall not issue rules or orders. The House version only says they shall not issue rules. Well, they shall not adopt rules without specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly. We started to talk about the orders already. The orders have been taken out of there specifically to allow the PUC to adopt some orders before the rules have been adopted. Just as a reminder, the word enacted requires the constitutionally, let me stop. Word enacted means that the legislature shall enact legislation giving their authorization to adopt the rules. There are constitutional provisions that come with enacting legislation. That does mean that it needs to pass through both bodies
Yes.
and be sent to the governor, where the governor can either sign, let it become law without signature, or veto, at which point the legislature could have the opportunity to override said veto. What for, and we'll talk about this again in section 6F at the end when we get there in a minute, but the form that the authorization will take is not specified here because you can't bind a future legislature to do anything specific. I know that we talked about this a lot previously, but there will be multiple options for the legislature to take when they use that, if they so choose to enact authorization. But one of the things that legislation would need to include, in my legal opinion, is the repeal of this section because it does bar the Public Utility Commission from adopting rules.
Oh, good point. So we've even made it
Yes.
more difficult for them to do this in
This
a
section
way.
was drafted advisedly.
There's a cork in the bottle.
Yes.
Can't take it out. So we pass
There's
law
a
that says, "Take the
statutory
cork out."
bar that will need to be repealed, in my legal opinion.
Wow.
So artfully constructed. Senator,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I'm understanding correctly, that really helps because but I just want to understand. So let's say it's going to come through the normal legislative process in bill form. And then it'll have to go through all the appropriate committees, be debated within those committees, and then be debated on the floor so that Vermonters understand it and what they're getting. And they'll have their eyes, obviously wide open and make sure that they understand what we're doing. And the cost is going to be what we find out over time through this process. And if there is one, then we can decide as legislators and whoever the governor is at that time, we can decide through that process if we want to move forward. Would that be?
Yes. There is
And that's transparent.
only one way to enact legislation, and it is through the constitutional provision of bicameral legislation.
Okay, so it sounds like we're doing the right thing based on this conversation as we understood it before. Thank you. And that's all I'll say on that.
Okay.
are you saying game set?
We'll talk about this again in a moment when we get to section 6, but so that's where we are for now. So now that's all of section 3. Section 4 is amending 10 VSA section 582, which is the greenhouse gas inventory section. So there's been a change here. Previously, you required a sensitivity analysis. It's being changed to a supplement. So Secretary of A&R shall include a supplemental accounting in the greenhouse gas emissions inventory and forecast that measures the upstream and life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of liquid, gaseous, solid, geologic, and biogenic fuels combusted in Vermont. So instead of a sensitivity analysis, which is a thing I can't entirely explain, now it's additional accounting of other fuels.
Page 22. Okay, so supplemental accounting, just another way of saying we're gonna enhance the current inventory to include more detail. And that includes, so instead of life cycle greenhouse gas, it's saying upstream and life cycle. We talked about a sort of a cradle to grave analysis. I'm not sure why life cycle alone did not capture that. Do you have any comments as to why upstream was added to life cycle? Since life cycle always, I thought, was comprehensive, but
I do not know.
okay. So flag on that for me to know exactly why that word's there. Thank you.
Okay. So on page 23, so here's where another one of the sort of bigger changes has occurred. So as I mentioned yesterday, there was a change to the coordination between the PUC and the tax department. So section 5 has been changed, and this was worked on with the tax attorney in our office. She drafted this. So notwithstanding 32 VSA 3102, which is the confidentiality statute, from January 1, 2024 until December 1, 2024, the Commissioner of Taxes shall disclose to the Public Utility Commission and the Department of Public Service a return or return information related to the fuel tax imposed under 33 VSA 2503, provided the return or return information provided is necessary to verify the identity, tax liability, and registration status of an entity that sells heating fuel into Vermont for purposes of administering the Clean Heat Standard. Pursuant to 32 VSA 3102, the person or persons receiving the return or return information shall be subject to the penalty provisions of 3102 for unauthorized disclosure of return or return information, as if such person were an agent of the commissioner. Pursuant to 3102G, nothing in this section shall be construed to prohibit the publication of statistical information, rulings, determinations, reports, opinions, policies, or other information provided the data is disclosed in a form that cannot identify or be associated with a particular person. Pursuant to 1 VSA 317C6, a fuel tax return and related documents, correspondence, and certain types of substantiating forms that include the same type of information in the tax return itself filed with or maintained by the Vermont Department of Taxes, disclosed to the Public Utility Commission and the Department of Public Service under this section shall be exempt from public inspection and copying. So there are federal tax laws that prohibit disclosure of tax returns.
Yes.
So there were concerns expressed by the Department of Taxes regarding having them turn over the physical tax reforms to the PUC. And so this is more of this system allows for the PUC and the department to go to the Department of Taxes and ask to verify the information that they have received from the fuel sellers with and against the Department of Taxes information without actually having them to turn over the forms. And so I will say this is a time limited provision. It's only for the year 2024 because that's sort of the initial time period where the PUC will be hopefully trying to gather the initial database of who is selling fuel in Vermont. And thereafter, the hope is that those fuel sellers will be registered and providing much of this information to the PUC already. So it is a temporary provision and it's at least a start. You could potentially revisit this provision in the future if it needs to be permanent.
Okay, right. Yeah, well, I can imagine that's a future legislature revisiting that, because part of that whole exercise was to make sure they had a comprehensive list, and that the tax department data was going to help them do that. So I would think, given that data changes all the time, they would need access perhaps after 2024 to keep truing up their list, but we can't address that in the future. This is to get started, as I say. Okay, and I know that Commissioner Bolia was wanting to be helpful, but was concerned about the way we get described access to that data. So, okay, great. Any questions on that? Bring it up.
Okay. So now we're into section 6. So on page 24, so first, section 6 is the implementation section that applies to the first round of the initial development of the Clean Heat Standard rules. So first, in subsection B on page 24, the facilitator section. So as I mentioned previously, the equity advisory group is going to sunset. But also, so there's another change here related to that as well. So facilitator, the commission shall hire a third-party consultant with expertise in equity, justice, and diversity to design and conduct public engagement. The commission and the facilitator shall incorporate the guiding principles for a just transition into the public engagement process. The commission may use funds appropriated under this act on hiring the consultant. Public engagement shall be conducted by the facilitator for the purposes of, and then it lists these 4 things, and these 4 things are also listed under the equity advisory group's duties. And so it's specifically requiring that during the public engagement phase, the facilitator be also conducting public engagement to respond to these items specifically. So supporting the commission in assessing whether customers will be equitably served by clean heat measures and how to increase equity in the delivery of clean heat measures, identifying the actions needed to provide customers with low income and moderate income with better service, and to mitigate the fuel price impacts calculated under 8128, recommending any additional programs, incentives, or funding needed to support customers with low income and moderate income and organizations that provide social services to Vermonters in affording heating, fuel, and other heating expenses, and providing information to the commission on the challenges renters face in equitably accessing clean heat measures. So as I said, that language already exists elsewhere in the bill, but it's adding here specifically.
Okay, great. The guiding principles for a just transition are codified where?
I believe they're in the climate action report.
Yeah, okay. Right, that's it. I mean, that's the place where I first encountered that. Okay, thank you. Page 25.
So on page 25, again, equity related provisions here. So translation services has been added. We're still in the public engagement. So in regards to the 6 public meetings, there shall be translation services available to those attending. Also, the subsection 4 that was in your version has been deleted, and that was requiring that the commission invite organizations that the equity advisory group had recommended. But because the public engagement facilitator will be having sort of their own engagement process designed for public engagement on low income and moderate income issues, that was not necessary.
The Department of Redundancy Department constructed.
How redundant.
What's that?
It's a double redundancy. Is that what's happening here?
No,
It's covered elsewhere.
it's
Okay,
yes, they're going with a different mechanism. I don't think it's redundant, but
there we go.
and then in subsection D, there's advertising. So all advertisement of public meetings shall include a notice of language services. The commission shall arrange for language assistance to be provided to the members of the public as requested using the professional language services.
Great. Because I know that we worked on each issues shortly before voting the bill out, and I had talked to the House about perhaps spending more time there because we ran out of time. Let's see, they've worked on that.
I have a question for the next little bit, but
Right.
Thank you, Chair Bray. I just have a comment to note, which is the translation services I had noticed have been taken out of the previous section.
Yeah.
And moved here. So it's good to see that it didn't just, I wanted to ask if it just disappeared, but it appears here. So that sounds like it's accomplishing the same task. Cool.
So I'm sorry, I said that at the beginning, is that you had it up in the front,
Yeah.
and then they added it multiple other places
Which
in the
makes it better,
implementation. Yeah.
thank you. I am just wondering, because we're about to get to F, the final rules. I'm just wondering if you could just explain, I know it's not a change, but if you could just re-explain what F means.
Sorry, I'm responding to
It's okay.
the House Committee is looking for me.
Oh,
Amy, we need her.
just
Where the Senate-
re-explain what.
Yeah, so I think we need to talk about F. F is the big one.
That, yeah, I was gonna say,
F
can we
is
just
the
like
big Yeah,
re-talk about what does F mean?
so F is the check bag. So 8131 and section 6F are the check bag provisions. So this initial part of F hasn't changed, but it does, so it still requires that by January 15, 2025, the commission shall submit to the General Assembly final proposed rules to implement the clean heat standard. The commission shall not file the proposed rules with the Secretary of State until specific authorization is enacted by the General Assembly to do so. So I already sort of mentioned that enacted has a very specific legal meaning. It requires the constitutional provisions to be followed in order to enact legislation. As I already said, you can't bind a future legislature into doing anything specific, but this is saying that the rules can't go into effect without authorization. So that will need to be enacted by the General Assembly. It might be in 2025, or it might be thereafter. It doesn't set a deadline, but the PUC can't take the next steps in adopting the rules until after the legislature gives the go-ahead in the form of a bill that has passed.
Cool. So by enacted, we mean a bill. It would take a bill for this to enact the authorization of the rules.
Yes, enacted refers to something becoming law. So in order to become law under the Constitution, it needs to go through bicameral passage. It needs to pass both bodies, the House and the Senate, and then be presented to the governor, where the governor has the option to sign into law, let become law without signature, or veto, at which point there will be the option to override. And as I mentioned previously about 8131, that will need to be repealed. So at the very least, that would need to be in the legislation. The legislation itself could take multiple forms. And so there are many options that the legislature will actually have. It won't just be a signing off necessarily on the rules as they come to the General Assembly.
What could that look like?
So it could take multiple, so the General Assembly will receive the final rules as proposed, the proposed final rules from the Public Utility Commission. Those rules need to be based on the statute. So if anything in the rules is objectionable, you can amend the statute so that then the rules will need to be rewritten to reflect what's ever in there. You could just add additional things to the statute that would then need to be addressed in the rules. You also could, repeal entire sections of the statute. You could pass legislation that simply says the PUC shall file the rules with the Secretary of State after they make the change in the rules that says blank. PUC shall change, date of effect until 2029 or something. You can make specific directives in session law to the PUC before they can do that. You could do nothing. You could repeal the entire chapter of the Clean Heat Standard. The legislation could take a number of forms, but it wouldn't it could just simply be the rules look great, file them. We authorize the PUC to file them.
So we still have to strike the notwithstanding.
Yes.
Okay.
But it could be anywhere from strike the notwithstanding language and file the rules, or make X number of changes to the rules, or fully rewrite whole sections because we're going to repeal or change any number of the statutory sections. It could take a number of different forms, as legislation often does.
Okay. But it's not, well, but it's not, there's no way to like skip when I asked what forms could that take, all of the forms look like a bill, not somehow bypassing the process with like some other mechanism.
So the other thing that we haven't actually talked about, and I know that I have to leave, but the really important part here is on page 26, number 5. So you didn't ever list anywhere in here specific elements that need to, there are some places in the Clean Heat Standard where specific things are identified that will need to be addressed in the rules. But there isn't a specific enumerated list of everything that needs to be in the rules. However, the House decided to add number 5, which says the final proposed rules shall contain the first set of annual required amounts for the obligated parties as described in 8124. The first set of annual required amounts shall only be adopted through the rulemaking process established in this section and not through an order.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah.
I will-
Which protects us
What a
against this.
lovely.
Orders we,
The order was used, there are 2 precedents for doing checkbacks
Yeah.
to rules, and one of them was bypassed by the
Not
PUC,
even a check.
and who issued an order instead of,
so this is very defined constraint use
Yes.
of,
So, in my opinion, so there are other places, as we talked about earlier, where orders can be issued, but this is one of the mechanisms that would actually be implementing the Clean Heat Standard.
right,
And so without that being enacted, the rest of the program doesn't make sense.
so if someone were to assert that through orders, you could in effect implement the Clean Heat Program or the Affordable Heat Act, it's not possible because essential elements of the program are required to be done through rule, not order. And you're not allowed to proceed to file that rule because of section 2, right?
Yes.
Okay. Could legislative enactment be another form of legislative enactment, be a binding resolution?
So a binding resolution, in order to have the effect of law, needs to go through bicameral passage to be constitutional. So
there
whether
is-
you call it a resolution or a bill,
Bill,
in order to be legally binding, it needs to go through bicameral passage,
With the governor.
with the governor. Bicameral passage and present.
right, I just want to make sure that if someone said, oh, it could be something other than a group of bill,
A bill, okay.
that
that's-
we're, the alternative is also equally binding in terms of full legislative action by both chambers and presented to the governor.
So for example, a resolution that goes through
Yankee
one
thing,
body does
one
not have the
chamber.
force of the law. You cannot repeal a statute in a resolution unless it
Okay,
is bicameral and presented to the governor.
great. So for those who are here for H31, we have altered our schedule a little bit so that we're not wrapping up this section till 9:15, just so that people know.
Yeah,
You need to leave.
but I need to leave, so.
Got a set for an element.
And let me see, I just want to make sure we got through.
We only missed the last couple of things. On these
Are you
lists.
able to save 2 more minutes and just,
I mean,
the last-
they've already asked where I was, so,
but there, yeah,
so unless I
Do we know what
send
that
up
changes?
word to, well, just on these 2 pages, yeah.
yeah.
Oh, just,
Could you ask for the, sorry, I thought we had reset to 9:15 and I didn't realize. We only changed our schedule, not yours. My
yeah,
mistake.
you have me tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
From 9 to 9:15.
Right, I was just trying to finish today, the walkthrough. Okay, if we can.
For me, I have no questions on the remaining 2 sections.
No, there's not much left. I'm just trying to dot the i's, cross the t's, and we're only paragraphs away.
My landscaper is going out of business.
Oh, no.
Definitely done.
I've muted him and videoed him.
Jude's on it.
So quickly,
I think we just have funding and all that stuff.
also funding, yeah, the funding report, we pushed it back to February 15, 2024, and asked the report to include information about workforce, market uplift, and training.
Okay.
I'm gonna skip the subsection I for a minute because I think K is quick. So there's also gonna be a report back from the equity group on those equity issues for low and moderate income customers that we've mentioned a couple of times. So that's a new report. So then additionally, in subsection I on page 27, in the check bag reports, there's a new requirement that the report shall include how to ensure fuel use that occurs outside. Oh, okay, so I'm fine, I can stay.
Thank you.
They started with someone else. Okay, so how to ensure fuel use that occurs outside the thermal sector is not impacted under this program. So I mentioned this yesterday. This has come up in this committee. I do think the intent of this bill is clear that this should only cover thermal fuels. However, there has been testimony that dyed diesel is used for many things beyond heating, and so asking the PUC to report back on ensuring that those other fuels aren't incorporated.
Okay, thank you. And there's a new sub K.
Yeah, so I already mentioned that. So that's a report on equity issues.
Okay. That's it.
Yeah.
No changes to staffing. Appropriate. Thank you for the extra minutes, and thanks for the walkthrough. The other thing we have is, and I think if you haven't, we have a timeline. So if we can just touch base on the timeline before you go. That would be helpful.
Yeah, so there aren't significant changes, in my opinion, to the timeline. I would say that the timeline is more detailed than the timeline I gave you originally.
Sure.
It just has more things. However, it's just, it's making more things explicit that were implicit, honestly.
Right.
So,
Seems like one of the, you've highlighted consultant and facilitator, that's just because that section, those provisions changed.
no, in your version of the timeline, they were bolded. I did that to reflect the fact that 3 separate consultants are going to need to be hired under this program. So that was a concern about the costs originally.
Well, I see, okay, so, right. One for public engagement, one for the Clinton Credit Registry, and another for the tag.
So the boxes on the timeline that don't have a date in them, they are not reflecting the prior date. It's there things that don't have a date specified in the bill, but that will need to happen. And so I tried to just fit them in somewhere,
Right.
to reflect that there are, and this doesn't even cover, the PUC is gonna have to do a lot of work that isn't necessarily on this timeline that doesn't have the specific in them. But this was trying to give you a sense that, and also, you know, there may be typos in this, that was subject to debate. So, yeah.
Okay.
The timeline is not substantially different than what what the Senate passed. The House added deadlines for the potential study and the hiring of the DDA, I think, and then they changed that report date that I just mentioned. But
All right.
I guess I do just want, since we still have this minute, I do just want to flag on the second page, there is no deadline in this bill anywhere for the clean heat standard to go into effect. That is not in here. It cannot take effect until at least after the legislature gives authorization to do so, which could be in early 2025. However, I work on legislation all the time. It takes a while to pass a bill. So I would just say that early in 2025 would be ambitious, but stranger things have happened. But there is no deadline by which the legislature needs to act. You could choose not to act. There's also no deadline in here by which the program needs to start. That's not anywhere. So it could be 2026 or it could be later. It could be late 2025. It's not specified.
They'll file rules, then the whole
And then-
LPAR process needs to unfold as well.
Yes, so.
Well,
So that is reflected in this as well. So if the General Assembly does give its legislative approval in the form of legally enacted legislation, it will then still need to go, the rules will then need to go to LCAR, which will review them again. And so the rules can't be adopted until after the LCAR process.
Great, thank you so much. Any committee questions for Mr. Council?
Just a thing.
All right. Thank you for the tour and the update. We have 4 minutes until we start H31. And that's what will be up next. So let's take a 4-minute break and